Hello, my name is Christine Person. I am a math teacher at Mechanicsburg Middle School at Mechanicsburg Area School District. My speed learning session today will focus on using mathematics as a tool to teach social justice and empathy. And I will focus a bit on my personal experience and then provide some ideas on how you may begin incorporating these concepts into your classroom as well. I'm actually going to begin this presentation by talking about my inspiration for this project. After several years teaching my 7th grade curriculum, I reached a point where I found I was wondering what I really wanted my students to learn. So tests and quizzes are important and they are necessary, but especially in math class, but what kind of lasting impression does that assessment hold? So what kind of impact does that have on our students? And I wanted to create something in which students felt they could connect to math in the real world and not just some trivial manner like balancing a checkbook. The year I created this project, I really connected with my students on a personal level, and I learned their stories. They talked to me, I listened to them, and I have always cared deeply about social justice and bringing that into my classroom in any capacity I can. So learning about their passions and what kind of things they care about was not only an opportunity to do that, but also to cater to their personal interests. I knew if I wanted to incorporate social justice into my curriculum, there were a few key questions that needed asking. So number one, what purpose does mathematics serve in the long term? So where will they see what I'm teaching them? How are they going to use it? How much of what I'm teaching them will they use? And this led to a second question. How can math become meaningful in a real world sense? So where will they actually see the impact of numbers? Third, and possibly the most important for the purpose of this project, was how can students connect to mathematics on an emotional level? So this is where the experience of this project was most critical. Students had just finished a unit on equations and inequality, so I designed an activity in which each student was randomly assigned an occupation with an income. So the average annual income of that occupation to last an entire year per se, or the duration of the simulation. These incomes spanned across low, middle, and high paying jobs. The ratio of jobs to students represented the number of each class of job in the United States. So for example, according to CBS News, 44% of US workers are employed in a low wage job. So in a class of 25 students, 11 students would be randomly assigned an occupation that is classified as low wage. Students then had to choose their income like a piggy bank, use it like a piggy bank. So taking out money to make purchases such as housing, food, transportation, and more. They also picked a random curveball card out of a bucket, which either dealt a blow to their savings. So an example would be a broken leg, pay $500, or it gave them a boost, such as you won $50 on a scratch-off card. The bulk of the mathematics in the simulation included operations with rational numbers, but students were forced to write 1- and 2-step equations for requirements like car payments and rent. I needed a strong activator for this simulation, so I decided to do a read aloud of A Shelter in Our Car by Monica Gunning, a children's book about a young immigrant girl and her mother living in a car in an undisclosed American city. So the book takes a hard look at the effects of poverty through the eyes of a child who is going hungry. She's dodging law enforcement, being harassed by her classmates, and feeling isolated. Gunning's book really set the stage for the activity my students engaged in, and the purpose of the reading was to get them into the mindset of what it means to be living in poverty and open their eyes to a sad reality. And one student even remarked, "You mean she has to take a bath in the bathroom sink of a public park and the water's cold?" At the end of the simulation, students compared how much money they had left at the end of the year and had the opportunity to take a more realistic approach to their savings and deduct for things like taxes, clothing, and medical expenses. And they were shocked when I told them to make deductions for taxes. If they had opted to purchase a car over a bus pass or a bicycle, they had to deduct the cost of inspection, regular average maintenance costs, and the yearly average cost of gasoline. Students were also forced to consider the fact that their current geographic suburban location, it lends itself very nicely to traveling via bicycle, whereas some other areas of our country may not, or that the cost of living in a city is far greater. Many were shocked at how quickly their income dipped into the negatives. Perhaps the most important part of this project was what came after the math portion was through. So with class norms set in place, students engaged in a respectful discourse on the impact of poverty. A door was open for conversation on who is more at risk for living in a life of poverty. So men or women, how are minorities affected? What about children? Then the students arrived at perhaps the most important question. As someone not living in these circumstances, what can I do to help? Students have practiced empathy building through mathematics, and a bridge was built between the math students had learned, and a real-world application that touched their hearts over their brains, which is a connection we long for as educators. Getting started with mathematics to teach social justice and empathy in a classroom is not necessarily a difficult task. The simplest way to begin is to just start by talking to your students. Start a conversation. Ask them what they care about. What do they want to change in the world? And from that point, do a little research and look to see what concept may be able to tie into your curriculum. One of the most critical steps to this process, however, is finding a way in which students will connect emotionally to the task at hand. But if it speaks to their hearts, their work will show it. And after all, the only thing better than a good mathematician is a mathematician that's also a good citizen. One of the biggest hurdles I faced throughout this project was running the conversation on poverty at the end of the mathematics portion. So yes, it can be very uncomfortable to talk about these kinds of things, and we want to do so in a respectful manner. I did this by establishing norms from the very beginning of the conversation. I explained what respectful discourse looks like and encouraged active listening. Most importantly, we as educators must model through our own words and actions how to be respectful of others. I ran the discussion in the form of a Socratic seminar, which students already had experience with, in my case, from their English and history classes, and students seemed to be comfortable with that setup. This slide is just the expectations and the norms that I had set for my students. So we will listen respectfully to each other. We will not interrupt each other. We will not have side conversations. All speech will be appropriate and respectful of others' social and economic status, race, gender, sexuality, etc. And we will not work on other tasks of any kind during the discussion. Several project ideas just to get you started could include something like building a home for Habitat for Humanity. This could incorporate geometry concepts like area, perimeter, and volume. It could also tie in scale drawings and proportions. You could even do an extension activity for purchasing materials in bulk for decimal operations. Another idea could be researching racial bias. My class studied statistics of traffic stops specifically, and another idea is to investigate ADA guidelines. This very quickly turns into a hands-on project. My students learned the dimensions for wheelchair ramps, and then we were able to measure several to determine if they had actually met ADA guidelines. This was great to illustrate geometry, particularly the Pythagorean theorem. A great resource is learningtogive.org. This website has hundreds of lesson plans already written to incorporate social justice and build empathy within your classroom. It contains all content areas, not just math, and it is completely free to use. Thank you so much for your time and interest in this presentation. If you are interested in contacting me for any reason, I would love to hear from you. You can reach me at the email address on this slide. Thank you.